During the war, around 36 million Europeans lost their lives, equivalent to the entire population of France before the outbreak of the greatest conflict in world history. The death toll was staggering, and that number doesn't even include the Japanese, Americans, or other non-European nations. In several countries, civilian casualties far exceeded military losses. The Soviet Union, Hungary, Poland, Yugoslavia, Greece, France, the Netherlands, and Norway suffered more civilian deaths than soldiers. However, in Britain and Germany, military losses were significantly higher than civilian ones. The Soviet Union alone lost 16 million innocent lives, twice as many as the casualties of the Red Army. Poland saw 6 million people perish, Yugoslavia 1.5 million, Greece 430,000, and France over 300,000. Poland in particular lost 1/5 of its pre-war population, including a significant portion of its educated and younger generations. Yugoslavia lost 1 in every 8 of its citizens, while the Soviet Union lost 1 in 11. To put this into perspective, Germany's losses were at a ratio of 1 in 15, while France lost 1 in 77. In the Soviet Union, the number of women exceeded the number of men by 20 million. In Yugoslavia, due to German retaliatory operations, in which all males over the age of 15 were executed, entire villages were left without a single adult man. Meanwhile, in Germany, 2 out of every 3 men born in 1918 did not survive the war unleashed by Hitler. In the Soviet Union, around 25 million people had no roof over their heads. In Germany, the number was only 5 million less. To put this into perspective, 500,000 homeless people roamed the streets of Hamburg every day. Europe's economy was in ruins. Out of the 12,000 locomotives that pre-war France had, only 1 in 4 was still operational by the time Germany surrendered. The war had wiped out 70,000 villages and 1,700 cities in the Soviet Union. Greece lost 2/3 of its vital merchant fleet. Yugoslavia saw a quarter of its vineyards destroyed, along with half of its roads and most of its railway bridges. 1 in 5 pre-war residential buildings was uninhabitable. In Poland, most small towns had been practically reduced to ruins, struggling to function in the aftermath of the devastation. French coastal cities like Le Havre and Cayenne lay in ruins, devastated by American air raids. Similarly, Hamburg, Cologne, Dusseldorf, and Dresden were heavily damaged by British and American carpet bombing. In Poland, nearly 80% of the capital was destroyed. Warsaw, the defiant city, was reduced to a smoldering heap of rubble. In the last 14 days of the war, the Red Army rained down 40,000 shells on what remained of it. Hardly any buildings were fit for habitation. Hunger also ravaged Vienna. For much of 1945, its residents had to survive on food rations of just 800 calories per day, a struggle mirrored in post-war Germany. A grim wartime joke among Germans suddenly felt painfully relevant. Better enjoy the war, because peace will be terrifying. Europe was sinking into despair. Even before the fighting had ended, the advancing Red Army committed mass rapes across Eastern and Southern Europe, including Romania, Slovakia, and Yugoslavia. Due to a lack of medical resources, in just 3 weeks after entering Vienna, Soviet soldiers raped an estimated 87,000 women. This shocking behavior was condemned even by Milo Vangelis, a close associate of Tito and a staunch communist at the time. He even wrote to Stalin about the widespread sexual violence occurring in his homeland. Stalin, however, dismissed the reports, responding that such things were simply a part of war. German women suffered the most. Between 1945 and 1946, approximately 200,000 so-called Russian children were born in the Soviet occupation zone of Germany. This figure does not account for the many abortions, some of which resulted in the deaths of both the women and their unborn children. The newborns who survived joined the growing population of homeless children. By the end of 1945, Berlin alone had around 53,000 orphans. The devastation of infrastructure led to further suffering. In Berlin, the destruction of the sewage system and contamination of water sources triggered a dysentery epidemic. Out of every 100 live births, 66 were stillborn. In the British occupation zone of Berlin, by December 1945, 1 in 4 infants died before reaching their first birthday. Warsaw fared no better. In 1945, a tuberculosis epidemic swept through the ruined city. Among 90,000 children in the newly liberated capital, there was only one hospital with just 50 beds. Very few Jews survived the war. Among those who were liberated, 4 out of 10 died within weeks of the arrival of Allied forces due to their dire condition. Between July and September 1946, more than 60,000 Jews fled Poland for Germany, fearing further pogroms. At the same time, the Soviet authorities were conducting forced population transfers between Ukraine and Poland. Around 1 million Poles were expelled from their homes in what is now Western Ukraine, while 500,000 Ukrainians were relocated from Poland to the Soviet Union. In just a few months, regions that had once been ethnically and culturally diverse became homogenized, marking the end of centuries of multicultural coexistence. But forced relocations took place in other parts of Europe as well. Bulgaria expelled 160,000 Turks to Turkey. Under an agreement with Hungary in February 1946, Czechoslovakia exchanged 120,000 Slovaks living in Hungary for the same number of Hungarians residing north of the Danube in what was then Slovakia. However, the most drastic expulsions affected the Germans. On May 19, 1945, Czechoslovak President Edvard Beneš declared that his country had decided to solve the German problem. Citizens of German descent were stripped of their property, which was placed under state control, and they lost their Czechoslovak citizenship. By mid-1946, nearly 3 million Germans were expelled from most Czech regions and sent to Germany. 250,000 did not survive the deportation. In 1930, Germans made up nearly 50% of the population of Bohemia and Moravia. By the 1950 census, they accounted for less than 2%. Similar events occurred elsewhere. Yugoslavia expelled 500,000 Germans. This was just the beginning of border adjustments. After territorial changes, around 7 million Germans still remained in Poland. The Polish authorities showed no leniency. Nearly all of them were swiftly deported back to Germany. After 6 years of war, Europe was an open wound. What happened next? If you want to see the next episode, subscribe to this channel.